Welcome to 247 Real Talk. I'm your host, Julian Perry. It's a pleasure to be here with you for another episode of the 247 Real Talk podcast. I'm a little late this week. I'm running down to the finish line here. This episode will air tomorrow, March 14th, and usually I record on Wednesdays, but it's been an extremely hard week at work and challenges where I get tired with my knee in rehab and I've been exhausted, family duties. And so I found myself in a place where it's Thursday and it's 9:39 p.m. and I am now recording the episode for this week. But as far as that goes, that's just par for the course. And what I do to ensure that I bring you the best of me at all times. As I said, my knee continues to get a little better. It's really slow now. In the beginning, when you can't bend it at all and you start bending it to a certain extent to where I am, that progress is nice and progressive every time you every few days. But it gets to a point where it is now where the rest of the journey for the next eight months is slow and sometimes painful. But I'm glad to be here. I'm glad to be here with you. I thank you for joining me. And tonight I'm going to talk a little bit about what's going on and in the country so far and where we are and what we need to do. So sit back, relax, and I'll be right back. I was on mute there for a second. I'm back. As I think about what I want to say quickly this week of this episode, something comes to mind. It is a verse of Matthew 6:24 that says, "No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money." I thought about it because I'm looking at what's going on in our country today, and many people don't recognize that this re-engineering of who we are as a country is a lot of it that's being sold to the public. The majority of the public is a smoke screen. I've said it before from the first episode dealing with this subject that what's being done is the reestablishment of the wealth gap between the chosen few and the rest. I thought about it this week as I listened to the unemployment numbers, and the numbers came out, and it seemed like if they hardly budged, and I thought to myself, well, what does that mean? We know that thousands of people have been laid off in the federal government. On the larger picture of a country, that's a small percentage, but it's thousands of households that have been affected, and I think ultimately thousands of people who will have to go for unemployment, and there's more to come. Today I heard that the Department of Education is going to lay off 1,300 people. So let me share a few things with you that crossed my mind. First of all, I thought and I said, if the re-engineering was genuine, if the powers that be that are making this decision truly felt that, look, we think that our design is that government is too bloated, so we need to streamline it in a true sense of ideology that we're here elected by the people to work for the people, then in my view, there would have been a very clear-cut and orchestrated plan to not lay people off and fire people, but to reassign people to other roles. We have in every job industry, in every industry in this world, everyone deals with attrition, right? We all get older. There is a percentage of every workforce that retires every year. Unfortunately, there's a percentage of every workforce that dies every year. So there are opportunities to take people where you feel that one area is overcompensated for, or overhead count, as we say, and repurpose those people and skill sets. I understand you can't do that for everyone because, number one, you have to have enough positions, and number two, you have to understand the skill sets. But that's where retraining and new training comes in. In other words, this should have been done in a humane manner, where the fact that people have spent years, sometimes some of them decades, working for these agencies, and their whole lives are devoted to that, and all they're looking at now after 30, 40 years is continuing to give that level of job work that they do, and to get to the finish line where they can retire with their 401k or pension or whatever. No one has thought about their families, their children, their livelihoods, the fact that some of them may be caretakers, both financially and physically. The mental stress this will put on a large population of people and our nation. We look at the careless, or it's not careless because it is carefully thought out, the lack of caring way that the government is executing its I don't want to call it, it's a plan, but it's more than that. But let's use the word plan for now. The amount of people that are losing their jobs because of the decisions made in Washington. The fact that there's no real plan to reintroduce them into somewhere else to continue making a living. The fact that this larger plan is resulting in a trade war. And I want to spend a few moments, or most of this episode, talking about two things: the trade war and the elected officials in Washington of who are supposed to be opposing this ideology. I spoke about it last week episode, and I had a whole episode entitled something like "Where is the fight?" We're still not seeing the fight. Is it that the actions of this new government have been so swift and powerful that they've left the entire Democratic Party paralyzed? Are they not ashamed to face their constituents and show that they have no backbone? The whole Democratic Party and those in the middle of the Republican Party, those sort of that oppose the radicals of the Republican Party, should have been, their noise should have been so thunderous that the world should have been taking notice. I remember the days in New York when there were protests, and I remember people, they're not opposition leaders, but people who were political figures in New York would go out and protest, peaceful protests, and they would gather thousands of people behind them, and they put themselves in the forefront, and they would lay down and allow handcuffs to be put on them and be arrested for the cause of understanding the sacrifices they make when they're elected by the people, and their inherent need to be of service to people and to serve those who are in need. We have an entire House of Representatives, 200 and something Democrats who are silent. We have a few people in the Senate who are voicing and making the most noise for the entire party. And when one person in the Democratic Party says something and makes a noise, behind them there is nothing. That one bit of noise should bring on other people to verbalize and to get people energized and to get the nation to stand up united. Understand something. While I talk about Democrats, while I talk about the other side, Republicans, the problems that are coming down, that are facing us like a deer in headlights, are not Republican problems. They're not Democratic problems. There are people who are less than rich problems. Think about it for a second. When you levy, if I'm a hard-working man who started a business in the steel industry, metals, and you turn around as a rich government and you place 200% tariffs on raw materials or whatever that I import, How am I paying to continue to import to support my business? And if by some means I manage to get upper middle income in the process, and I can afford to still import with 200% tariffs, what happens to my customers? What happens to my customer who says, I want to remodel my basement and I want to use metal studs? I'm just making this up. And you come to them and say, okay, materials are $500. And then you come to them and you say, whoa, 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 no, no, no. That's no longer the case. Materials are now $10,000. What happens to your business? What happens to your livelihood? What happens to, and we're hearing the noise, but it's funny how embarrassment silences people. We have a lot of people who follow the Republican ideology. That's a personal choice. I'm independent. But they follow the Republican ideology. And they are people who in certain parts of our nation have a lot of money from farms, from acres of land that they sow and reap, and they don't do it themselves. Over the years, they've employed hundreds of immigrants, giving those immigrants opportunities to feed their families and making them richer. We've heard many complain already. There's nobody to reap, to sow their fields and reap their crops. That's not the type of job that someone who is born in America, who is chasing the American dream, usually takes. Most people born this day and age in technology and everything in the United States of America are nothing like we were when we were kids. They're not rough and tough in the way we were. Kids don't go out and play in the backyard with no shoes on and get a piece of glass cut in their foot and come inside and cry and wash it off and go right back out. Kids don't use pieces of wood and make scooters out of them and toys out of them. They're all in front of the technology, and my kids included. And what that has made them in the eyes of us and the eyes of what the people who built this nation is kind of soft. They've got a newer, they say, better way, work easier, not harder. But many of us of my generation, those before me and those just after me, maybe understand the value of hard work. And sometimes that means building your family and your legacy and leaving something for your kids by using your hands in hard labor. By fighting each and every day to make $1 to build your business, only to have it torn down by things like tariffs. Like I think I mentioned a story last week where someone interviewed someone who was very proud of electing his government, and he's a businessman and he makes T-shirts and he sells the designs as T-shirts and he imports all the raw materials. And he was very sure of himself and so proud of the tariffs because he said, oh, they have to pay it. He didn't understand that we have to pay it. It's the charge for goods coming into this country that has to be passed along now to the customers. Who are those customers? Let's think about this a second. Let's think about the most popular item that's imported. I don't know what it is, but let's just say we're thinking about that item. Something that its use is so versatile that from the richest to the poorest and everybody in between will use it. When the price increases by 25 or 200%, those who are filthy rich might moan and groan because they're used to being cheap, but they can afford it. The majority of us who are divided by that wealth gap and in a totally different socioeconomic status, we are the ones who need the same item who can't afford to buy it. Depending on what it is, it could be life and death for our businesses, therefore for our families, for our livelihoods. But ideological wise, when I first started learning about Democrat and Republican, the first time I really started asking questions about differentiating between the two, and I looked at how people view them, the most basic description was majority of Republicans are well off, they would say. rich and upper middle class, and the Democrats represent some middle class, lower middle, lower income, and poor. So if any of that stands true, and I think some of that has some truth in it, then we can understand why, as our lives and the visions we have for the American dream crumbles in front of us, the majority of people who belong to the current leading party in government, the Republican Party, are not yet feeling the pain. But you will. Unless there's a reverse, you will. The stock markets are looking at what they see as a trade war, and whether you're rich or poor, it's reacting. When you tell the majority of people that they got to start saving their own money, that their investments have to change, it has a direct impact. We take numbers like, inflation remained almost the same. That is a measuring stick, but it doesn't necessarily represent the truth of the person who can't afford to buy eggs, the person who can't afford to feed their family, the person who lost their job after 3 decades because someone came in and said, you're out, and we offer you no option. And again, when I say we offer you no option, many of the people who are being laid off or fired were not given a severance package. Many of the people, or I think the court just said had to be rehired because they were on probation, didn't do anything to violate their probation. If I own a business and I have 10 employees and my business is not doing well, and I can show my business is not doing well, and therefore I have to let go of some people to be able to pay the rest. That is painful, but that is a reality that is real. That's not the case that are here. We got people in Washington, in the government, who are enjoying the best perks and making tremendous money. Those in government who were rich and who were Republican, let's face it, their businesses, their pockets got richer, got more bloated with money. They are benefiting. Who you think is benefiting? And make no mistake about it, Americans, we are a nation that's brilliant at inventions. But most of the smart business people in this country who are wealthy found that manufacturing and producing provided greater profits when it was done in countries in the world where the American dollar has great value and where the return on their investment is cheaper because labor and production is cheap. That has been the design of this country for forever. So when you make the argument that, we need to start having American goods produced by American people, bought by Americans, if you write that down on a piece of paper, that's great. But the reality of it is, because this society has been designed where the massive big companies produce their products overseas, places like China, etc., we don't have the manufacturing facilities. And we can't ramp that up fast enough that it won't seriously affect the American population and destroy a large part of us, our livelihoods. But think about it for a second. A lot of the cars, you got cars where American car makers are saying that tariffs are going to hit them hard because the American vehicles are being imported, either parts-wise or assembled overseas. You think about companies that make phones, smartphones, the biggest ones out there. Those companies are in China. They're manufacturers in China. The design may be in Silicon Valley, but when they're done, they pick up the phone and they call China and say, I need 1 million of these made. And they're filthy rich over here because of the cost of labor and the cost to bring those finished products back into the United States. We are creating a trade war with some people in this world who've been our partners forever. This world should be very conscious that its basic timeline suggests that we can't be that far off from a conflict enough that ignites World War III. And if you find yourself in that situation with no allies, what do? We become the target. I need everyone out there to think about this beyond your pockets, beyond your hate for Democrats or your hate for Republicans, beyond your hate for things like DEI that I mentioned before. Many of you wealthy will feel the pain either by services that were once cheap that will hit you in your pocket, or by services that no longer exist, by research that was going on to help people fight diseases like pediatric cancer that have been now defunded, to things about from DEI like handicap accommodations and so many more that impact every single person in the United States, one way or the other, in terms of what can happen in our lives, whether we can become handicapped, whether we are born handicapped. It doesn't discriminate. Our Creator didn't discriminate and say, well, wealthy people are born healthy and poor people will be born handicapped. No. It's just that the wealthy people who have handicaps have way more services and better accommodations than those who can't afford it and depend on government services. When we are going to get to a point, if we continue, where people can no longer go to the doctor anymore, that results in a sick nation. That results in a nation where the average lifespan decreases, or it's in a more granular look, the average lifespan for the rich increases and the average lifespan for the poor decreases. Here's a simple statistic. For the most part, I mean, we've had presidents. We had one president, I forgot his name, who died from a month after the inauguration because he spoke outside in the rain for 2 hours. He had pneumonia and he died. We have a few presidents who were assassinated. But if we look at the last decade, the last 2 decades, President Jimmy Carter died at 100? His wife died at 90-something. President Reagan died at 90-something. His wife died at 90-something. President George Bush Sr. died at 90-something. These things, barring God calling them home at an early age, there's a societal part of that. And that is, there's no mistake that the medical care and the entire environment afforded to people like our past presidents and people in Congress. I forgot the name of the lady from California now. It'll come to me. Who died? She was a serious anti-gun activist. She died at 90-something. Look at the people in Washington and why we call it an aristocracy. We call it an aristocracy because they go on forever, and then their generations after them get into politics and get fast forwarded into their new roles because of who their parents were. But look at the lifespan. Look at the lifespan. Look at the medical care afforded. I don't want to call names of all this. Some would have come to mind, but it's not about calling something against their opportunities. It's about us as people recognizing that we are not in the same category as the people we elect in Washington. The things that are afforded to them, the health care they can get either because of their position or their wealth, is the same set of things that they're taking away from us. Look, I don't know what you're going to do, but I'm going to keep talking to you. And I'm going to hope that more and more of you start listening and start recognizing that the least you could do is have the conversation with someone else and put your heart and soul into it with the hope that you change your minds. I've often mentioned to you a friend of mine on Facebook, a friend I grew up with, who is not just staunch Republican and staunch MAGA, but he's also distasteful and says horrible things about even President Biden, Vice President Harris, from the day they were elected. And it was like every day or every other day he would have a derogatory statement for 4 years. I found it very ironic that now he speaks about government maybe once every 2 weeks. And I thought at first, well, he fought it for, he wanted this government, its impact, he has nothing else to say. But I remember this week, all he came out and he said was, oh, well, the tariffs are necessary. They're eventually going to pay off for a future America. And even though the stock market is down and our 401ks are down, it'll eventually bounce back. All his fire is gone. And if I know human beings like I do, in the back of his mind, he's worried. He's worried because he is well off, but he's not filthy rich. And he is younger than I am, so he's not retired yet, and I know he's not. And he's watching his 401k disappear. And even though deep down inside he's saying it's going to return, he's not that sure. Because each and every day something else happens that cuts something else. We got air traffic controllers. The numbers of the air traffic controllers have been cut while the numbers of planes in the skies increases. And then there's this stupid excuse that our president made about DEI without even meeting or knowing these people. He just arbitrarily decided that because he wanted to abolish DEI, that every single person he was getting rid of was hired because of DEI. How is that true? I saw someone on the show the other day that talked about the fact that she had, I think she said, a bachelor's and 2 masters and a PhD. She was in DEI. So, I mean, you got to wake up. I don't care what side you're on. This is not about hating anyone. This is not about envy because someone else has won. This is about the power of the people to not only level the playing field, but the power of the people to make sure that the majority of us do not lose whatever we have left of the American dream and the fight we've been struggling so hard to maintain it. We elect government. They're elected by the people to serve the people, not some of the people, not the rich people, not the middle class only, not the poor people only, all people. And whenever you do a job and you decide to serve all people, there's always going to be a part of the population that's disgruntled from all cross sections of the population for one reason or another, whether it be wealth, race, creed, color, gender, it doesn't matter. But we cannot continue to alienate so much of our society and expect that we will become and continue to be a country that the world looks up to as the greatest nation on this earth. When our own allies are hating us right now, from Canada to European nations, to European Union, to so many others. Yes, many organizations, America has been the biggest financial contributor. And I hear people saying, oh, it's time they pay their way. They don't pay what America pays because they can't afford, many of them, to do it. Why? Because we are the United States of America. When we took on the role to be the lead in this world, leadership has its privileges and its costs. I'm not saying that we shouldn't work with them to get them to invest more in something, but where we're going about it is all wrong. And at some point, someone in their own Republican Party has to be strong enough to put their job on the line, to put everything on the line, and do the right thing with the hope that the people, the righteous people in this nation, will follow. I'll leave you with this. I often say that nothing that has happened and will happen is a surprise to God. That hasn't changed. So for those of you and us who believe in our Creator, who wake up every day understanding who we are and whose we are, will understand and know that despite all that's going on around us, and despite what the fears that are trying to be inflicted upon us, that He will never leave us. He will never forsake us. But what that requires is strong faith, and it requires action on our part. We must do our part so that our Creator can do His. Thank you so much, as always, to my new subscribers, my old subscribers, and everyone else who's willing to listen, to get involved, and to push this message further. For those of you who stand on the same level ground that I do, who believe that we're not here by chance, and who believe that there is a more powerful force that created us, that's seeing the good and the evil, I will say this. Proverbs 28, verse 25. The greedy stir up conflict, but those who trust in the Lord will prosper. Until the next time, please take care of yourselves and each other.